this is going to be the tutorial for the maple bag available on my Etsy. It's pretty straightforward. As you can see, we only have 3 pages that we're working with. The number 6 page is labeled 6, so you know that it's way off to the side and it's not connected to 3. So you want to begin by pulling up the PDF. You do have to adjust the scale to 100% US letter size if that is your size. I personally have to adjust mine to around 106 or 107 because my printer is not a borderless printer, so it usually has a gap, as you can see. So I have to adjust it for my printer, but most printers are borderless, so if yours is, you can just skip this step. It's also available in A0 if that's what you prefer, but we're going to be doing PDF for this video. So once you have the papers printed out, you want to lay them out and match them up corresponding to the numbers. So I'm showing here that you need to be able to differentiate for your own printer because the top one was a little too small, as I said earlier. So yeah, you want to measure the box, make sure it's 4 inches so you know your printing scale is correct, and then you want to begin connecting the pieces corresponding to the numbers. I personally like to use tape because it's simple, but you can use glue or however way that you prefer. Next, you want to start cutting out the pattern pieces. Be sure to be very careful during this part because you don't want to overcut and then your proportions will be off throughout your sewing. So make sure you just cut along the line. The sewing pattern does also include seam allowance, so you don't have to worry about that. And here I'm showing that they all should match up correctly. So you can use any fabric that you want, but I'm actually upcycling these pants because I really liked the corduroy fabric and I thought it would be great for a bag. I do recommend that you use a thicker fabric because this is a bag, so thinner fabrics will be a little more flimsy. So for the number 2, you want to make sure you place it on a fold because we want to make sure we have 2 symmetrical sides. So it does say cut on fold, but to reiterate, you should be cutting this one on a fold. You're going to want to cut out 2 pieces so you have 2 base pieces, but since my fabric was a little flimsy, I wanted to double up on it. But if yours is a thicker fabric, you can totally ignore this step. As you can see, it should open up to reveal a symmetrical 2 sides, and you're going to have 2 for the front and the back. As I said earlier, I ended up doubling up because it was pretty thin for me, so I had 4 for each side. But once they're connected, it makes no difference. Using the same pattern piece, you're going to use that to create the lining for both sides, so you should have 2 pieces of lining. So you can use whatever fabric that you want for this one, but I chose to use gingham. So throughout the video, I'm going to refer to it as gingham, but you can use any pattern of your choice. This is when we get started with the corners and the overlining. For the corners, I actually ended up folding the fabric in half because I was too lazy to cut out 4 individual pieces. With thinner fabrics, you can get away with this, but if you're using a thicker fabric, I recommend that you cut the 4 out individually. They should come out symmetrical since the fabric is thin, and then I'm repeating the same thing to have exactly 4 corners of gingham. So the same thing with the overlayer, you're going to want to use the same fabric or different one depending on the style that you're going for. But I wanted to match the overlayer with the corners, so I'm using the same gingham fabric. And I'm also using the same method of folding over because, as I said, I was too lazy to cut off individual pieces. So I folded it in half so I would have 2 even and symmetrical sides. The overlayer is also one of the pattern pieces that you want to make sure you cut on the fold, because you do want to reveal 2 symmetrical sides. If you don't, you will only be left with one side. So please make sure you cut on the fold for the overlayer and the base pieces. So as I said earlier, with the base, I did have to double up because it was thinner. But for the corners, I didn't want to double up on gingham, so I used the same corduroy to make sure that it was an even thickness for all of the corners and the base. If your fabric is thick, you can also skip this step. You can skip any step that requires doubling up. But for my personal bag, I wanted it to be a little bit heavier, so I made sure to double up. So you want to also make sure to cut out some lining as you did with the base pieces for the corners, because once you connect the corners to the base, it's going to be bare in the back. So you want to make sure you have some lining for both of them so the inside reveals a clean finish. So altogether you should have 3 layers. You should have a lining, the thick layer, and the gingham overlayer. The same thing for here. I actually have 4 layers because I'm making it thicker, but you should have just the lining, the base, and then the overlayer. So next you want to begin by folding the lining inside so the edges are clean. You only need to fold about 1 centimeter, so we have a nice clean edge, and then you want to iron that in place so everything is nice and crisp. So for this part, you want to make sure that you're pinning the base pieces together and the lining, but you want to make sure you leave the top part open so we're able to fold it in later and create a very nice and seamless finish. If you don't do this, it will be very tricky to fold it over. So you want to make sure you leave the top part open, but you want to make sure to sew the rest of the sides closed. And then I'm also doing the same thing for the corners, but the corners you can pin and sew every side. It doesn't really matter, but for the top, you want to make sure you leave the top part open. So once everything is sewn together, you can begin by connecting the corners to the base. So what I did was kind of align it from the middle and then pin the middle and fold it along the sides to match up with each corner to make sure that it was as even as possible. You can do this however you're comfortable with, but for me, this is how I was comfortable with making sure the corners were even with the base. And as you can see, it's also protruding out, but once it's sewn and we iron it in place, it will be perfectly flat. So for the top part, you want to cut a little slit at the top to make it easy to fold. And then you want to fold the gingham layer over the base so that it creates some sort of coverage. And then we're going to fold the lining inside so they kind of meet at the middle. But you want to make sure the gingham overlaps. That's why it has a lot of seam allowance like that, to kind of cover the base and to cover however many layers that you used. So once you folded that, you want to make sure to iron it and pin it in place. This is how it should look like when it's pinned, and then you're going to go ahead and sew everything together. I also went and pressed my corner seams and my top seam so everything was crisp. Now you want to sew your darts closed. I just pinned them straight and then sewed them closed. And I did the darts a little bit differently than how they usually are, just to make it simple for any beginners that were trying to do this project. Next, you're going to want to flip the bases wrong side. So you want the good side to be on the inside and then the bad side to be facing you. And then you're going to pin all of the sides closed shut. This is how the bag should look like when it's flipped inside out, and it should be even on all sides if everything was measured correctly. So this part is actually labeled first in the pattern instructions, but I decided to do it last since it's easiest. You want to cut out a rectangular strip that's 53 by 2.5 inches, and this is going to act as our handle. My fabric wasn't long enough, so I did have to sew two pieces together. As you see, there's a little line in the middle. And then you want to fold both sides to meet in the middle like this. And to help me keep it still, I'm going ahead and ironing them shut, so it's a little easier to maneuver around the bag. So once you have the folded piece and ironed, as you can see, it's easier to stay in place. You're going to want to put it on the edges of the bag and make sure both folds are overlapping. So the inside should have a fold and then the outside should have a fold, as you can see. You do want to leave the top part open. The part that we folded in, you want to make sure that you're not putting the handle on that part. It should go over like this. You may have to adjust it to how long you want the handle to be, but generally it should be enough to fit over your shoulder. So once you have the handles pinned, it should look something like this, and then the top would be open. So you're going to take pins and make sure you sew that shut, because if you don't, it will end up unraveling in the long run and it won't last you a while. The last step is to sew the handle on, and then we're finally finished with the bag.